Hey, everybody. Thank you for making it back from the coffee break. I will say, in the spirit of coffee breaks, this is a little bit of a palate cleanser. I will not be talking about AI or agents or anything, so you can kind of ease your way back into it. So, my name is Keith Laba, and I'm super excited to be here. This is my first spatial data science conference, and I've been really impressed by the quality of the talk so far and the workshops yesterday, and just the general talent and expertise in the room. I am not what you would call a geospatial expert, so I'm gonna do my best, but I've been doing analytics for a long time now, and I'd like to share a little bit about like an aha moment I had around how analytics can really be supercharged by like geospatial approaches in location-focused industries like home building. So in a quick disclaimer, if this is a terrible talk, we can blame Cardo because they're the ones who thought it was a good idea for me to be here talking. So by way of introduction, I'm the VP of Analytics for Sekisui House. We're the US arm of Japan-based Sekisui House, one of the world's largest global home builders with over about 2.7 million homes built since their inception in 1960. Sekisui House has a deep focus on consumer research and how people live and thrive in their homes. And their focus, as mentioned earlier, is to make home the happiest place in the world. And they truly mean it. And in the US, you'll see Sekisui House sold under the brands of Shawwood, Woodside Homes, Richmond American Homes, Chesmar, and Holt Homes, and is one of the largest home builders in the United States. So I'm going to belabor the intro a little bit longer, and I know I'm going to give you a brief summary of my background. I know you could just look this up on LinkedIn, but it's germane to my talk, so just bear with me here. So as mentioned, I've been doing analytics for close to 30 years now. I've stopped counting across a lot of industries. I did research at NASA, worked in auto retailing, investment firms, developing pricing optimization models for cruise lines, a couple banks scattered in there, post-secondary education, nonprofit with Arizona Science Center, before landing at Sekisui House. So the two big takeaways here is one, I'm old, and two, I've had lots of opportunities to develop analytical solutions for lots of different types of industries. And that's kind of what I love about analytics, is you can apply it anywhere. And the transferability is pretty neat. So throughout all of that work, I've always kind of leaned on this general framework. And it was actually referenced earlier in one of the earlier, somewhat referenced in one of the earlier talks, but I call it the analytical spectrum. It's a way to think about how analytics can mature and evolve. So if you think about complexity along your X, business impact on your Y, there are various points on this spectrum, and it kind of helps you understand where you are in your analytical journey. So the first stop on your analytical spectrum is descriptive analytics. So what happened? So it could be like, how many sales did we have last month? That's something you could probably solve with a table or a bar chart or something pretty simple. Next stop is diagnostic. Why did it happen? So that's where we're starting to dig into, like, what are the regions or segments or products that are driving an increase or a drop in sales? You might be using crosstabs or regression modeling to potentially look at drivers of activity or results. Third is predictive. So that's what's going to happen. So based on what we know about what happened and why, can we predict what's going to happen using forward-looking metrics or different tools like forecasting models or predictive models, those kinds of things. And the fourth step is prescriptive. So that's what should we do about it. So that starts to look at using optimization models, predictive ML models, those kinds of things. So if we knew that a particular segment was driving the drop in sales, and we have some forecasts about where those segments are going to grow across the United States, maybe it helps us determine where do we want to allocate our capital in the future, 5 years out or whatever. So this was a pretty robust, useful mental framework throughout all of my experiences. So I was like feeling good. I kind of knew what I was doing, and like you could use this framework wherever you go. So I'm fairly pretty darn smart. So, I think that, but then what happened is I joined a home builder. And that was a completely different ballgame. The analytics, the dashboards, the scorecards that had worked so well in the past, crickets. They fell flat. So the work just wasn't resonating with the audience. It's not that the analytics or the modeling was wrong. It just wasn't really landing. We could produce a model, a scoring model that would give us, for given markets, you could provide a score, pretty robust in the background. We liked it, it was useful. But I'd get the stakeholders would nod and they'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. But then they wouldn't really know what to do about it. So it was the idea of how to create that connection. It wasn't the math that was the problem. It was the lack of connection between the numbers and the decisions. So if we come back to our analytical spectrum, it's not that this paradigm was broken. It's just that it was two-dimensional. So it was lacking the context to bridge the insights with action. And so this gap here, that insights to action gap is a common issue in analytics, right? When insights are technically correct, it just doesn't translate into action. So for home building, you can be talking about all these insights, but if they're having trouble understanding how to turn that into action, those insights just can't get across, right? So we needed a bridge, right? We need a way to bridge across that insights to action gap. And for home building, that's geospatial analytics. So what it enables us to do is to be able to communicate our insights and our analytics in a way that resonates with a home building audience. Home builders are a unique bunch, let's say. A lot of them have been in the industry for many, many years, growing up, jeans and boots, walking lots, driving around markets, trying to understand what's going on. Not the most analytically savvy or advanced group of people. They're kind of like fly by their gut. But the one thing that they do is they always look at maps. They're not using it for analytics, but they're mapping communities, school districts. Where are our competitors? What are different, plots of land, those kinds of things. So you can't walk into a home builder's conference room without seeing a map with pins on it, showing you where all their communities are. So what I was doing, just showing you a table with scores on it, right? I was adding unnecessary cognitive load to my stakeholders, right? They had to see the data, and they had to say, okay, well, where is that? And then, so they're spending all their time doing that because that's how they think. They think geographically. So they're burning these brain cells, and they're not able to then say, okay, now what do I do about it? Right, so we have this opportunity to leverage geospatial analytics, not just to show where do we have communities, or where are our competitors, or where are our school districts, or where are our population centers, those kinds of things. We have an opportunity to really use geospatial analytics to drive advanced analytics and communicate advanced analytics here. So I'll show you a few examples of potential ways. These are simple examples of ways that we can bring that third dimension of geospatial visualization and analytics into home building for typical questions that you might want to answer. So most of this data is using our AGS sociodemographic data, summarized at the core-based statistical area, or CBSA level. So if we use our analytical spectrum as our kind of our framework here, we can talk about some example what happened type of questions. So let's say we wanted to know how many households do we have by CBSA? That might be useful to know, right? So a table works fine, I guess. There's over 380 plus CBSAs, depending on how you count it. So you can't show them all. You can show a top 10, I guess. So could be useful to be like, oh, that's, New York's big, and surprising, that sort of thing. But when you add the where, it brings in this whole other dimension, right? So you can start to look at how adjacent markets look to each other. Because, for example, you may see a high population market, and what you might think is a lot of people there, eventually that's going to, quote unquote, fill up, and people are going to have to move to adjacent markets. So understanding where your potential, quote unquote, overflow markets might be, like, that's important. And you can't do that in a table, right? Like, you don't have a sense of geography. So this starts to leverage that map affinity that home builders have. They just naturally gravitate towards this. I could show the exact same data to somebody in a table and a map, and the light bulb goes off with the map, and it doesn't with the table, right? So let's go to the next one, diagnostic analytics. Why did it happen? So let's say we wanted to drill into our households a little bit, and let's look at households with incomes over $200,000. So if we're looking at a particular consumer segment, or premium product, something like that, we want to know what percentage. So there's our super engaging table again, right? So you can see some things there, but again, not a whole lot going on. You can't really decide to go do something with that, right? So if we look at a map, again, there's opportunities for us to look at those adjacencies. You can also identify where there might be like, there's some higher income concentration in certain areas that we didn't expect. I mean, you got your usual suspects. You got your SoCal, your Northeast, your Southern Florida, your Pacific Northwest. But then you start to understand where there might be some pockets where you might not have originally thought. Like your brain doesn't naturally go intuitively. And like I mentioned, home builders like to operate intuitively. Further, if we wanted to get a little fancier, we could look at compound annual growth rate of that percentage of households over 200,000 and see like what markets are seeing a faster growth in that segment, for example. I didn't do that here for the interested reader. You can check that out for yourself. But there's a lot of ways that we can do that. So you can start to look at growth rates potentially of that segment as well, which leads us into our third stop on our analytical spectrum. What's going to happen? The predictive. So one metric that home builders care a lot about is home prices. And where they're going. So one of the popular things to look at would be like a Zillow price forecast. So if we look at the Zillow one-year price forecast by CBSA, we can look at that again in a table. This really breaks down now because you don't really just care what's at the top. You actually care what's at the bottom. You actually care what's in the middle, right? So this really shortens, does not give you much of a line of sight. And you also don't understand, like, I don't know if I'm going to go to Keene, New Hampshire just because there's a 2.28% price growth, right? Because there might just not be enough capacity there or whatever. But we put in a table, and it gives us some more information, right? So you start to see where we have, we can quickly see some patterns to those price forecasts, where things are, a little stronger. You can see that there's pressure in some of our higher price markets, like in the Californias. Those are the lighter colors means lower price appreciation or price declines. The darkers is some price appreciation. So the Southeast is an interesting market potentially if you look here. So there's a lot you can start to glean, but you're not looking at it as one at a time. You're starting to look at it holistically, and you're starting to connect those geographic dots. So you see where they're going with this. Fourth stop is prescriptive analytics, and I'll spend a little bit longer on this one. So we build these strategic models that look at opportunities for investment. And so one of the things we do is in home building, timing is really important. So it can take a really long time between when you first purchase land and when you actually build the homes. It could be like 5 years, right? So we need to look at short-term and long-term opportunities. So we build a model that looks kind of at, identifies markets with short-term and markets with long-term. So great, we could throw that into a table, short and long-term scores. I perturbed this data so you don't have our secret sauce. Not that you're can really glean anything from this anyway, but whatever. This be a lot of trouble with this, right? So we could look at long-term scores, but if you want to like, well, what about short-term scores? Well, then you have to resort it or use conditional formatting or something silly like that, and you're adding to that cognitive load. But if we put in a map, then we can start looking at multiple variables, right? So we can do some things that are a little bit more sophisticated. We can, the darker colors, let's say, represent a higher long-term score, and then the higher regional boundary could be a high short-term score. So you could look at, the high dark colored regions, those are slam dunks, both short and long-term. But the really cool thing is when you start to look at the off-diagonals and you look at the ones that are maybe low and dark, meaning long-term investment opportunity, but probably don't want to try to turn something around real short-term, or vice versa, something that's tall but light-colored. Maybe that's something we want to get in for a short-term opportunity, but don't expect to be kind of building out a robust market strategy long-term there. So this gives us an opportunity to really look at things from multiple dimensions and still leverage that map affinity that home builders have. So, so my takeaways from all this are, 1, still old. 2, the analytical framework still works. But when it comes to industries like home building or other sort of location-focused industries, you need to bring in that other dimension. And it's not just, location isn't just another variable. It's that dimension that allows us to see the story and act on it. And geospatial is what creates that bridge between insights and action. Thank you very much.